Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I really wanted to discuss with you the danger and the toxicity of book boyfriends and the danger of falling into the fantasy. What inspired me to do this video is that as a single 30 years old myself, I realized that we tend to really compare nowadays for our expectation in men and for our relationship goals. We compare to Instagram couples, for example, YouTubers, celebrities, and we also tend to compare to the fantasy of book boyfriends and of the relationship that we read in our favorite romances. And yeah, I was thinking to do this video because I feel like when you go into romance, you should be aware of a few things. The first danger that I wanted to mention is that you have to realize that men in books are often presented as the Prince Charming. So meaning that they have no seemingly apparent character flaws, they have dream-like physique, and this is not realistic, let's be for real. One example that I wanted to point out is, for example, and as much as I love her, Devne Perry. In most of her series, when you look at it, even though some men can have like some traumas or things that they're battling with, in the way that they interact with the female character, in the way that they're so understanding, in the way that they are like always coming to the rescue of these women, I feel like it's not really realistic. Why? Because a man in real life is not always gonna understand your struggle, what you're going through. We always say that men and women came from different planets. We say that men come from Mars and women from Venus, and I think it's not even a joke. It's something we have to take seriously because it feels like we're speaking two different languages. So in those books, what baffles me is that you never have that problem of understanding, of communication between the characters, because you have to think that those characters are, manufactured by women. Even if you get a male POV, you can sometimes really see that it was written by women. And one of the examples that I have in mind is in the Windy City series. I feel like in Mile High and in the Selfish Duet as well, you could tell that Eli and Xander's were thought of by a woman. I'm not saying that men are not sensitive, and Eli and Xander's show a lot of sensitivity. They do. But the thing is, sometimes their reflection and the way that they're gonna think about their next course of action, you can tell that this is something that a woman can do and that a woman would tend to do, but not necessarily a man. And for example, I would say that the danger is that even if they are presented with character flaws, it's always something that we can bypass, and it's always something that they are ready to change for the woman, which doesn't really happen in real life. To come back to the Windy City series, both Xanders and Eli in their respective books are presented as player, right? And players in the sense that they love to interact with a lot of women, they love to flirt with a lot of women, and they don't really take relationship and women seriously. And you can tell with their character development that Eli, since I'm really insisting on Eli because the book is the one that caused me the most problem, because it was insta love. He was instantly in love with Logan. He was instantly ready to change for Logan. He was instantly ready to do everything for her. And even if it happens in real life, I'm not saying that it never happens. It's really rare. So you have to keep that in mind when you're going to interact with men. Don't expect them to change everything about their lifestyle for you. One other example that I noted in the Dreamland Billionaire series, you have Cal. I think it's the third book. I forgot the title, but he has alcoholism and drug and substance abuse problems, and he's ready to change it all for Alana, which I think I didn't have that book, so I don't really know how it ends, but it didn't make sense to me, because you should want to get out alcoholism and substance abuse for yourself. You should want to be a better person for yourself and not out of love. And I feel like in a lot of those books, even if the characters are something wrong with them, they are ready to change because they're in love, because they found the one. There's another example that I had in mind. You have in the Born in Blood series, and God knows how much I love Cora Riley, so this is no criticism by any means. So you have Lucas in the Born in Blood series, and he was cheating on Arya, right? And she found him, so she saw the cheating happening, and it broke her heart, and he ended up saying, oh, I cheated because so and so reason. So first of all, you never have a good reason to cheat. This is unacceptable. She forgave him and they moved on. They never really addressed it. You could tell that she has some trust issue at first, but she quickly got over it because she was so in love. And in real life, it doesn't happen like that. And if somebody is cheating on you at the beginning of your wedding, this is problematic. So that was the first point that I wanted to mention, that I feel like men in books, they are either presented with no character flaws, or if they have character flaws, they are excused. And it's always saying that they're going to change for the lady. A second thing that I wanted to mention, men are always presented with a dreamlike physique. And you have to realize that not all men are going to be above 6 foot with a six pack and with great physical attribute, if you understand what I mean. But that's how most book boyfriends are presented. They are like so tall, they are like good looking, they have abs, they are really, athletic and all of that. Most men, they're gonna have a beer belly. Most men, they're gonna be not in great shape, especially when you have so many books that talk about older men in their 40s. As we grow older, it's difficult to maintain a certain physique. I'm 30 years old and I'm never going to be as thin as I was when I was 15, 20 years old. It's never going to be as easy for me to lose weight, and it's the same thing for men. So when I read about, men that are in their 40s, and you have the heroine in her 30s, and the man is like so athletic and so, have like this Greek-like body. I'm like, in real life, most men, they are either gonna be, really skinny, scrawny, sometimes with a belly. Some men are gonna be overweight. And I feel like there's not a good enough representation of all the variation of men that we can come across. In most romance, they are always, I would say, tailored and manufactured the same. I think it's a bit sad because this is not the reality of the society, and we're all not gonna end up with somebody that have a six pack. We have to realize that. And I feel like even if they talk about a little bit more of the variety and diversity, it's always for the women, right? It's always gonna be the women that is, for example, curvier or has a disability or something like that. But it's rarely the men, I mean, in my opinion. And I feel like minorities are not really represented. It's not enough. It's not often that you're gonna get an Asian man, a black man, an Indian man, a Muslim man, for example. It's always gonna be the same type of person, and they're always gonna be, with a certain background, with a certain education. So I feel like it's a bit unrealistic, and you have this image of again, Prince Charming, that we need to depart from, because men in real life, I'm sad to say that, but they're not Prince Charmings. I wish they were. Third thing is, men are often presented as overbearing, bossy, and sometimes borderline abusive. And the women are often presented as their weak counterparts. So it excuses their behavior because the woman needs protecting, the woman needs them to boss them around, which to me is not really right. And in real life, it doesn't work like that. Of course, the typical way of a household is going to be the man leading the family and being the provider and the protector. But sometimes in some household, it's the opposite. It's the woman being the provider. It's the woman being the protector. It's the woman leading the finances. So it's not always black and white. We have to think about the fact that there's so many possibility of household and the way you're going to build your family and the way you're going to build your marriage. And the examples that I have for that is Zaid in Hunting Adeline, and he is like plain an abuser. I'm sorry, but what he did to her in the first book was unforgivable. She decided to forgive him. That's on her. But I feel like this is not an example of romance that should be given to young girls, because you have to think that most romance are gonna be read by young girls. They don't have their mind completely shaped and completely grown yet. And so they're gonna be heavily influenced by their readings and whatever they find in books. So when you have characters like Zaid in Haunting Adeline, or when you have characters like Declan, for example, in the Dreamland Billionaire, so the Lauren Asher series, to me it's a problem because, for example, Declan is really bossy, is really, he puts down Iris a lot. He has a lot of criticism for her. He's never happy, he's never smiling. And all of the sudden, for her, he changes in the book, and in the next book, you can see that he's joking around with his brother, and all of that in the name of love. That is not realistic. If you encounter an abusive man, trust me, he's not going to change for you. like they did for Adeline, and it became more soft for her. Chances are, if he's abusive to you, or if he has been abusive in the past, whether it's mentally or physically, he's gonna stay that way. And I mentioned the cheating in Cora Riley, that was excuse for Lucas. If a man is a cheater, he's gonna stay a cheater most of the time. Some of them can change, some of them can make an effort, and it's the same if you are dealing with substance abuse and alcohol. It's all about the power of the mind and the motivation and the determination. But sometimes some character flaws are really difficult for you to part with. If you are a certain way and you've been that way in most of your relationship, trust and believe that it's gonna be the same with you. It's not because he beat up his 10 ex-girlfriend that he's gonna suddenly want to change for you and go to therapy for you. It happens, but it's really rare, so you have to keep that in mind. Also wanted to say that I feel like some of the really bad traits of book boyfriends are excused because we're in a fantasy of a book. This is something that we would never accept in real life, but we accept it because it's a fantasy, because it's not a real story and it's a book. But I feel like it starts that way, and you could sometimes switch to your real life and excuse it in real life. What example that I have? The bully romances. For example, I'm going to take one particular book. It's Dean in Kingmakers. He made Cat Life a living hell. I also have Untouchable by San Marino. And you have Carter. What he did to Zoe was unacceptable, especially because it was in reunion. There were other men with him. But we excuse it because it has a happy ending. Same for Kingmakers. And we think it's cool because it's a nice love story and we love a bad boy. And I feel like we excuse the term bad boy and we give it an envelope and an umbrella of so many terms that are not supposed to be categorized under bad boy and that are not acceptable and forgivable. Like being a bully, like being bossy, an abuser, like being controlling with their girlfriend. Because Dean, even when he stops bullying Kat, it becomes a game of him controlling her a lot, controlling her pleasure, controlling her release. I mean, you have a SM relationship, which I respect a lot. This is a world that I don't understand, but I respect a lot. And you have to be careful about that. There's rules, and I feel like sometimes SM relationships are portrayed in those teenager relationships, for example, between Kat and Dean. This is not something teenagers should practice without research, without information, without learning about it. And I feel like sometimes in book boyfriends, the authors, they tend to confuse being controlling with some aspect of an dominant personality, and they tend to use that word a lot, like I'm a dominant, I want to dominate you. This is not something that all men do, and even if they do, it's under really safe rules and in a safe environment, and it is something that is discussed, and sometimes you have contracts even to make sure that both parties are willing and give their consent. So I feel like it's a gray line in books, and there's this thing about this bad boy porn, this trauma porn that is in books. The more the guy is shocking, the more is like aggressive, the more is like portrayed as something almost to the line where it's like unacceptable. It attracts a lot of buzz. Like, look at Haunting Adeline, look at the Devil's Night series by Penelope Douglas. Most of those men in those books, what they did was completely unacceptable, right? Starting from Michael with Erica, but we excuse it because we are feeling, oh, I'm reading a book, it's not real, so it's not a problem. But it is. At the end of the day, if it was something in real life, it would be problematic. And let me take a break in my points just to tell you guys that I realized that this video might be seen as hypocritical coming from me because I read bully romances, I read dark romances. What I'm saying, and that's what I said, the danger of the fantasy, as long as you realize that it is what it is, meaning a fantasy, and you don't fall for that, it's fine. I feel like you can appreciate those books, even if they have dub count, sometimes borderline rape content. You know that it's not something that is forgivable. You know that it's not something that is acceptable. But as long as you can just put that in a box and think that this is just in a book, this is not it's supposed to go in real life, it's fine. I'm talking more for the person that tend to idolize those book boyfriend, dream about them in real life, sometimes compare them to their current partner and say, oh my God, my husband is not like Luca Vitello. Oh my God, my husband is not like the Eaton brother or something like that. We shouldn't be doing that. because it's really dangerous. And at the end of the day, it is what it is, an imaginary story, something that is not real. Another point that I wanted to mention, and it goes along with the fact that they're presented like people that have dreamlike bodies, they always are great in bed, always, and they are well endowed, which is not always the case. Trust me, most men, they're gonna have a variety of sizes. There's a little bit of everything for everybody. Not everybody is gonna enjoy a huge manhood. Not everybody is gonna enjoy that because it's painful. You have to realize that, and you don't get used to it in one go like the girls in those books. This is not realistic, guy. And what I mean about great in bed is also the fact that I used to read a lot of historical romances, I think I told you guys, and every time those ladies would lose their virginity, it would be a dream. And trust me, as somebody who lost her virginity, I had my mind shaped by those books, in the sense that I feel like in our society, men get their sexual education mostly from porn, and women, we tend to get our love education from movies, series, books, something more dreamy, something more romantic. So we expect something romantic going into our first time, and we expect the man to know our body, we expect the man to give us our orgasm. Let me tell you, women that had orgasm their first time are, a dime in a dozen. It's not really something that happened often. It happens. I know some friends who did, but it was after careful preparation and multitude of foreplay, and they already knew their body themselves. So that is something that is really important. You need to learn about your body. You need to learn about what you like, because it's gonna be difficult for you to explain to a partner what you like if you don't know it yourself. So I feel like the way those sex scenes are described, I remember the scene between Bella and Edward in Twilight, and everything, for example, in Ali Hazelwood. If you read about her male characters, they are all the same. Over 6 foot, a big manhood, really well endowed, great in bed, and thinking about the fact that most of them are supposed to be nerd, geeks, and scientists. Is it really realistic? I don't want to be cliche, and I don't want to say that all scientists, people working for NASA, people working for labs, they are not good looking, they cannot be athletic, they cannot be tall. There are some scientists that are like that, but most of them, they are not. Let's be really honest. And so her to describe those model-like men, that are supposed to be brilliant scientists, and on top of that, great in bed, it's like, girl, do they have any flaws? And to come back with the sex scene in historical romance, it was in the Middle Age, guys, or sometimes in the 1800s. How do you believe that men back then knew about oral pleasure? We come from a really misogynistic history, and we are in a patriarchal society. So I tend to have really high doubts that back in the day, men were focused on women pleasure, especially knowing that they used to have a multitude of mistresses and they used to cheat a lot. I tend to think that they were thinking about their own pleasure only, and so to me it's not realistic to have a man in the Middle Age focused on the woman pleasure, knowing what a cunnilingus is and even what a clitoris is. I mean, come on. To me, it's difficult to read a historical romance and think that their sexual relationship are believable. This is what I had in mind when I went into my first sexual relationship, and trust me, it was such a big disillusion. I was so disappointed because it was nothing like I read, so I just wanted to mention it. Sexual relationship in real time are not like that, and after you lose your virginity, you're not comfortable on the get-go. It needs 1, 2, 3, 4, multiple times, especially if your partner is really well endowed and has a large instrument. Let's say it's gonna take time for you to get accustomed to the size and to get a lot of pressure, but the first few times are really uncomfortable and not pleasurable for women. So yeah, this is something that I wanted to mention. Another point, men in the books are always either financially stable and more financially stable than the woman, or they are borderline billionaires, rich. And why I'm mentioning that, you have sometimes in book really grand gesture that are not something that a real man is gonna do. Because you're saying that you crave pasta, is gonna fly you to Italy in Rome to eat it in a small Italian restaurant. Because you're saying that you crave to go to Greece, is gonna fly you to Santorini. Because you're saying that you love Asian food, is gonna fly you to Tokyo to eat sushi. Like, what kind of man does that? A man is never gonna do all that for you. They're gonna do that, but the proposal in books, they're always over the top. One thing that I wanted to mention, why I hate when I read a book and it's automatically a billionaire, because it has so much time for the lady. It's like, oh, let's do this, let's go on vacation, you're feeling down, let's do this. A real billionaire is really busy. He cannot take 20 vacation per year. He cannot take off work in the middle of the day, because that's how they became billionaires. That's how they make their money. Time is money. So they're not really portrayed in a realistic way, because you feel like they have so many free time. You feel like they are never working in books, first of all. Even in books where they presented the man as being financially, in a struggle compared to the woman, you always have the woman to come and save the day because she's an heiress. She has an inheritance somewhere. She has money stashed somewhere so she can help the man and they live happily ever after. I mean, in real life, it really doesn't happen a lot. Globally, I would say that men are really presented as overall really cliche, unrealistic, because like I mentioned earlier, their POVs are often written by a woman. So you have to understand that if they have all those criteria that you're looking for in a man and you're feeling like, okay, I'm gonna look for a man like that in real life, I'm gonna compare my actual partner, my actual husband to them, it's because they're written by women. So they know what we want to read, they know what we expect in a man, so they can deliver that to us because they're selling a fantasy. Keyword, selling a fantasy. And please take a shot anytime I mention unrealistic or fantasy in this video. I know, sorry, I keep repeating myself, but I'm almost done, I promise. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention, and that is not specifically towards men, but in general, relationship in books are really romanticized, and we always get the happy ending, even if there's struggle along the way. For example, there were lies involved or big reveal, we always manage to overcome that, even if the situation seemed hopeless, and they always manage to work on their issue, to work on their troubles, and make it so that they can have a happy ending, and then we never hear about their struggle ever again. And even if you get an epilogue or sometimes a second epilogue, it's always something nice. They finally have children, they have the house of their dream. So I feel like they don't mention enough that relationships are hard work. Forgiveness is not a given. It's not something that automatically happens and that is to be expected. Sometimes people can choose to not forgive you. Sometimes people can choose to not believe you. Sometimes people can choose to not go with the relationship and stop it. We don't really see a lot of breakups. And even if you have a book that is not a happy ending, it's often because the character died from disease or something like that. It's rarely because they chose to not stay together, because they realized that they were not meant for each other. Because those books are sometimes going to present to you two people that you can clearly see that they are not meant for each other, but we're going to accept it because it's a book. And this is the reality that we want to believe in. We don't really talk about the fact that to maintain a marriage, because sometimes we get epilogues that are like 10 years later, 5 years later, and everything is still a dream. First of all, you're gonna get butterfly in your stomach for the first few months or years of the relationship. You're gonna have a honeymoon period, but after that, the struggle begins, right? That's when you're really gonna see if the person is made for you. That's when you're really gonna see if you're really in love, or if it was only the feelings of the first few beginnings. Because to maintain a marriage, to maintain a long-term relationship, it is hard work, it is compromise, it is communication. Sometimes you're not gonna agree on the education of children. So yeah, I would have to say, don't fall for the fantasy of book relationship, book boyfriends, because most of the time in real life, it's not going to be as easy. It's not going to be as smooth. It's not going to be as, something that falls in line and makes sense all of a sudden. No, sometimes it's going to be difficult. Sometimes the person is not going to be how you expect them to be. It's not going to be your perfect match. But this is, I feel, like the best relationship. So my advice to end this video, keep books where they are, an entertainment. And I'm saying that for books, but movies and shows as well. It's purely for entertainment purposes. Don't fall for the fantasy. Don't start to compare your life to those books, because it's really unlikely that anything like that happens in real life. And this is why there are books. So this is really thanks to the imagination of authors and their creative minds. And we shouldn't expect that in real life. And even if you ask them, I'm sure most of them will tell you that their life are not as ideal as what they write. And sometimes they write to also escape reality. And I think that's what we should be doing. You can read to escape reality. You can read to fall into a fantasy, into a dreamlike state. But please remember that this is what it is, and you have to come back to real life at some point. So yeah, I will see you guys this week on Friday, the 1st of December, for my first Read Mass video. and then we will go back to regular schedule in January after my Read Mass Marathon. So yeah, guys, thank you for listening to me today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.